All right, well, thank you everyone so much for coming. I'm really looking forward to this. It should be a really interesting session. My name's Daniel, and I'm with Insight Collaborative, a small charity that works with refugees in Greece and Turkey and accompanies refugees more broadly along the migratory pathway. And I'm here with our partners at Pulse Connect, who, if you guys don't mind, I might put you on the spot and ask you all to introduce yourselves quickly, just give us a bit of an understanding of who you are and what you do at Pulse.
Yeah.
Michael, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So Randolph and I are both co-CEOs of Pulse Connect, or a decentralized identity as a service company aiming to provision, both businesses and individuals with decentralized solutions. We're extremely excited to be here and help discuss the importance of data protection, data privacy along the migratory pathway, as well as across the humanitarian sector. And we've got our Chief Data Privacy Officer as well, the data diva, Debbie Reynolds, along the ride. You can feel free to.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the introduction. Like Michael said, Randolph Rodriguez, co-CEO and co-founder of Pulse Connect. Pulse Connect is simply a fresh and hip startup based out of Chicago. We're focusing on creating contactless hardware as well as applications that give people the ability to have once and for all sovereignty over their data and their information they make on a daily. And as part of this journey, we also have Debbie Reynolds, who is serving as our official Chief Data Privacy Officer. If you want to go ahead, Debbie.
Sure. Well, I've been introduced twice already. So I'm Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. I'm the Chief Data Privacy Officer for Post Connect. I'm a data privacy and protection expert, working with companies around the globe. I like to say my work is at the intersection of privacy, law, and technology.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. So for our attendees and indeed for those watching afterwards as well, this will start with a presentation from everyone except for me, essentially, and then we'll move on to some questions as well. I'll have some questions, I'm sure, from this presentation, but everyone in the audience, if you'd like to ask any questions, you can type them either in the chat box or in the Q&A box at the bottom. And if you're feeling shy, then feel free to, you can privately send those questions to me as well. And I will ask them on your behalf when we get to a kind of appropriate time. So yeah, with all that said, I'm now going to mute and turn off my video as well, because I don't know the first thing about this. So without further ado, over to you folks.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we welcome everybody for tuning in. We greatly appreciate you for taking some time to learn about how we can raise the standard for data privacy, across the globe, but specifically in the humanitarian sector. Let me get this one here. Get on the next page. So this is the team. Our CISO wasn't able to tune in, but William Slater is a pivotal role in how we've gone about implementing our privacy enabling technologies. So some of the main themes today are going to be secure data and privacy rights of not just refugees, but all humans across the globe. Data ethics and responsibility in the humanitarian sector, and then some of the regulations and considerations that many of the actors that participate in the sector should keep in mind while either volunteering or working with any programs that are interacting with refugees or anyone of the sort. So some of the keys around secure data and autonomy. If you're in the humanitarian sector, I'm sure you're familiar that the migratory pathway is not an easy one, and then data retention along that path is very difficult, whether it's keeping physical documentation on you, while people lose their homes and lose a lot of the assets that they have when they are forced out of forcibly displaced. It's extremely important that people can have access to their data. Decentralization is a good way to go about that. There's a lot of portability issues and walled gardens, which is a concept that describes inadequate data interoperability between systems. So pulling your health information out of an electronic health record system, or pulling some of your details out of a more centralized system when you have to be able to log into their portal to pull out the information from it. It doesn't make it very easy for data portability. And it's extremely important that there's secure and efficient access to your information, even though, as you move along your pathway, but also when you arrive there. And so the whole concept of verifiable displacement records becomes all the more important, as someone may get healthcare services in Syria, and then may along the way have get legal assistance or dental work, maybe in Greece. And then when they arrive to Turkey, they very often don't have a lot of the documentation from along that route. And there are a couple of specific hurdles that people face while moving along that route. So some of the key, the first one that tends to catch people up is language barriers. It's very difficult because Google Translate is not as fantastic as you may think. Hold on one moment. It's not as fantastic as you may think. Migrants need to pass through several countries that use different languages and alphabets. So the continuity of care for medical records is often lacking, and the consistency often isn't there. And so migrants who need to manage and track all of their documentation have a hard time, seeing as it can, their documents may be in many different languages, often those that they don't speak. As far as literacy, like I said, programs like Google Translate really don't do a great job of capturing dialects and other cultural nuances, which can be painful. So that even if a patient may be literate in one language, the ability to use the alphabet appropriately may inhibit them from gaining access to additional resources. And so poor access and data portability, when pushbacks occur or when migrants are apprehended by authorities, their devices are often taken. And additionally, any ID cards that are issued to those refugees can easily be lost, stolen, or misplaced. And then again, it's not easy for anyone working in this space, but it's extremely important that we consider all these hurdles that people have to overcome on the daily. So some of the actors and participants in the sector, and it's extremely important to note that they all have different roles to play within the space. It's important to note that they all have different bodies don't really do a good job of communicating with each other as far as the migratory populations or the NGOs that are help servicing them. Often the consequence are those people being helped. So poor coordination and lack of standardization of documentation, and often the format that these may come in is never cohesive. Sometimes some are digital, some are hard paper copies. And again, like we said earlier, they're very, very easy to misplace. So whether you're a healthcare provider, a volunteer, a government, or a journalist, or just someone traveling through and looking to assist, it's very important to consider what different hurdles the different people have to overcome. So getting into it, specifically healthcare providers, NGOs and volunteers and governments, many volunteers don't receive adequate training in regards to data protection and data privacy, the same way that healthcare providers might. So while some healthcare providers or volunteers, some registered nurses, maybe trained in HIPAA, often those that come over won't be as familiar that you're not supposed to share, personal identifiable information with your associates. You're not supposed to pass along, copies of your refugees' documentation to those that they haven't fully and thoroughly approved it to. And so that's why we've got some essential responsibilities to keep in mind: that PII protection, selectively sharing the information as requested by those information that it's owned by, and then enabling secure portability so that when you do pass off a piece of information to someone that you're assisting, you're doing it in a format in a way that they can securely protect it and keep it with them. And so I'd like, Debbie can break down some essential principles that can be deployed in practice. If you just keep these concepts in your mind, it'll make it all that much more easier to help enable the privacy of those that you're helping, because often it's never as easy as they say in theory.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So I guess the two things I want people to keep in mind about this is kind of a two-pronged issue. And some of it can be handled by technology, and some of it has to be more human-based, so that you can do the right things to protect yourself. So first of all, there are privacy laws around the world, and they're different in different regions. But one of the major impetus behind these laws is about protecting the rights of individuals with their data. So depending on where you are, those laws definitely may be different, but the flip side of that, or not the flip side, but the thing that you also have to keep in mind is that there's also a security part of this. So whether it be cyber or something like in your physical presence, being able to find ways as you're traveling, knowing you're going from place to place, knowing that you're going to places that may have different laws and regulations about privacy, I think is incumbent upon the individual to find ways to, protect the data that they have, whether that be, having, I think Michael had talked about being able to have copies in a place that you can pull from if, let's say, your ID is lost or some other type of information is lost, being able to have understand who you should be able to share data with. So not everyone should have access to your, personal records. Obviously, if you're in a situation with health, that may, be a little bit different. But again, different areas have different laws about how they protect that data. But I think an individual plays a big part in how that data gets protected or how that data gets disseminated. So being able to understand that there are laws and regulations around the world that may be different about privacy rights, but then also keeping in mind the thing, which is the security of data, whether it's physical or it's in a digital format.
And that begs the question too, Debbie. And I know Michael is presenting a slide right now in which around the world there's many privacy regulations that each country has implemented. But really, the question is how do we handle the complexity around all these different nations and having their own data privacy bills, and two, what's the right balance? If do we incorporate too much technology and less human emotion or touch, or how do we even balance that? And I feel that's really the balance that we're trying to solve here at Pulse Connect, is delivering solutions that one help people that face the harsh realities of going from country A to country B, and two, making it universally and making it globally accepted.
Right. So I guess the two things I would bring up would be transparency, right? So transparency is a major theme in a lot of privacy laws, meaning that if you provide your data to someone or agency or whatever, there should be a level of transparency to you, the individual, about how your data is being shared or used. So those types of things really need to kind of look out for or ask about. Ask how your data is going to be protected, who is being shared with. That's very important. But the other part is you definitely want to do your best to secure the data that you have, because we have seen people like things like identity theft, where someone has enough of your personal information to almost impersonate you, or people have lost money because their credentials were misused in some way. So being able to try to find a way to, as an individual, to protect your information and make sure that it's only being used for official purposes is very important.
Well, I saw the crazy statistic. I think we were talking about this study beforehand too. Is that you could purchase a person's identity on the dark web for $2,400 to $2,800, and it's just like how is that even? You're telling me that you could purchase someone's whole digital life, pretend to be them, take out information on their social security numbers or whatever government identification they might have for $2,400 or $2,800. It's pretty nuts. Right?
Yeah, it's very scary. So the more information that people have about you, the easier it is for them to be able to take advantage of your identity. So those, don't share, simple things. Don't share passwords with people. Don't, if you have situations where you have passwords, you want to change them on a regular basis. That typically is one way that people get in. So a lot of times when people think about identity theft, they think that that individuals go through some extremely complex process to do that. But unfortunately, a lot of it is someone maybe impersonating someone in an official capacity, and they basically get you to give them information, like give them your password or give them some information that would allow them to be able to, do identity theft. So being able to have technologies that can help people better protect themselves and limit what they share is very important.
Yeah, especially since again, you're working in the humanitarian sector with people who don't have, they're dealing with much larger problems than risking that a volunteer that's working with them is going to protect their information. And it's important that we help raise the standard for data privacy and protection in the sector. Insight Collaborative actually publishes their data privacy standards on their website, and I encourage everybody to go check them out. They're doing, A, fantastic work, but B, are making a broad and public step to increase that standard. And so regionally, like Debbie was saying earlier, there are different standards and they're not necessarily adopted by everybody. But those principles that we were talking that can help everybody, I guess, attune to the highest, at least the highest principle of those regulations is by making sure that individuals have secure access to their information, that information is portable, that they've provided consent to whoever's, acquiring it or manipulating it, and then they have the opportunity to erase it, and that if they need to make a correction, that they have the ability to be corrected. So Debbie, if you can maybe speak on the right to be forgotten and how important that is specifically to GDPR.
Yeah, sure. So the GDPR in the EU is a very comprehensive data privacy law. And what we're seeing is as data privacy laws have been passed since 2018, we're seeing a lot of different regions taking bits and pieces of the GDPR and putting it into their regulations. So one significant feature in GDPR is called the right to be forgotten or the right to erasure. So the right to be forgotten means an individual who is in the EU. It doesn't have to be an EU citizen. You just have to be in the EU. You can request certain companies to be able to delete your data in certain circumstances, right? So not it's not complete, meaning that not everything about you can be erased, but there are some things that you can request to be erased about you. So let's say you have an account with a company, you're still a customer. There are certain things that they have to retain about you in order to maintain your business relationship. But then there may be other things that you may be able to request to be deleted. So we're seeing around the world a push to limit data retention in general, only to the length of time that is necessary. So this doesn't really apply to governments because governments can keep data forever, but other like goods and services that you buy, you may have a right in certain countries to be able to say, I want you to delete my data. So that's kind of an evolving thing around the world, and it just sort of depends on why the data is being kept. So that would not apply in the same like a health situation.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing to me is that, since the beginning of the internet, which was when, probably what, 1987, 1990, when it was barely growing up, it was great. I mean, it was made so computer A could talk to computer B, but you don't know anything about computer A or computer B. You don't know who the person that is controlling the computer. You don't know what's the certifications or even who they are, right? So I think I was reading a couple of novels, and really the biggest problem, the reason why we're suffering so much in terms of cyber crimes and cyber attacks and identity theft and so forth, is because the internet is missing an identity layer, right? When the internet was made, it was made to be interoperable with multiple computers, but there was no security and there was no privacy. So I find it insane that 20, 25 years down the line, we're barely starting to address these problems, which, I figured should have been addressed a long time ago, but now we are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so there's going to be a new version of the internet that's going to come out that's going to address some of those issues. And
Yeah.
so Pulse Connect is, really on the cutting edge, in my opinion, and being able to try to address these types of problems, looking at things about decentralizing information, helping people be able to pick and choose what they share, right? Because the internet was really based on sharing, and even a lot of the tools and software that was being created around the world was not made to forget things. So now we're saying, well, privacy things, we want security, right, on the internet, and then the other thing we want is we want the internet and different tools to forget things about us or to protect things in a way that maybe it wasn't uh, originally designed to do. So I think this push towards protecting data of individuals, giving individuals more agency over their information and how they share it is the future.
What the crazy thing to me is that, the data that everyone creates every single day, whether you're liking a Facebook post or you're sharing an image or you're connecting with friends that you met in high school or whatnot, what people don't understand is that the data they create is a part of themselves, right? It's more than just bits or codes or, ones or zeros or numbers. It's your direct digital representation of yourself. In other words, it's your digital twin. So that's really where we're coming from the perspective that the data that you create or the information that's gathered from you, whether it be from a bigger corporation or let's say social media company, um, they're really taking a part of yourself by owning that data and not taking care of it, right? So really, what needs to happen is that there needs to be a massive effort, coordinated effort globally, in which organizations and small businesses and not-for-profits and basically anyone and everything that are connected via the internet, um, to to respect the data, respect our privacy, but more importantly, understand that you're making the digital version of yourself, and the data that you make is your digital twin. And once you start thinking about that, now it becomes a human rights issue, right? Is if there's a company that's taking your data and owning it, they're owning a part of yourself. So
Yes.
it's
Um,
really, you know,
it's extremely important to respect the public-private partnership in the humanitarian sector that that the different participants are partaking in. And it's extremely important that we raise the awareness around the need for data privacy and securing, refugees or patients' information. I totally agree. Before we field some questions from Daniel, Debbie, are there any other data privacy regulations that you think are worth noting, either across, all across the globe, but in particular that stick out to you?
I would just say probably the GDPR most of all, because it's the biggest and most comprehensive of all. And as I said, a lot of privacy laws that have come after that have borrowed liberally from that. So if you understand the GDPR, it'll help you understand a lot of the other newer privacy laws. But I think the whole impetus behind the privacy laws is to try to protect or in the digital age the rights of individuals. So that's kind of the really big reason behind these laws. And so as people go into digital spaces, they're trying to find ways for companies to do business, but do it in a way to protect the privacy of individuals. So what we're seeing now, or what I hope to see more of, is companies finding ways to protect individuals, but then also, I think the important thing with Post Connect is like you're not relying on, you know, Amazon to protect your data or Google to protect your data. You're saying, this is my data. It belongs to me. I want to control it, and I want to control who has access to it. So then that way, you're not relying on Amazon. You're not relying on Google to protect your data. You can control or have more agency over your information yourself.
Totally. Well, Thank you guys very much for giving your input and sharing your knowledge. We appreciate everybody else that's tuned in, and we'd love to field some questions from Daniel, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. That was really interesting. And as I said beforehand, it's something I'm clueless about. So it's really good to learn a bit more about that, really.
Yeah.
And it's also raised a huge amount of questions for me. I've also received some questions privately from the audience as well. So I will start with those, make sure our audience get their questions answered.
Okay.
So firstly, I wanted to ask, you were talking about it was especially that map, I think, that inspired this question. And someone's asked if you can kind of maybe just give us a brief idea of what some of the differences are. And I guess they don't mean clause by clause or anything like that, but just how you said, I think you said GDPR is the most comprehensive. So how does that differ from, say, China's cybersecurity law or Canada's PIPIDA? Is that pronounced? I have no idea how that's pronounced. Or that kind of thing. Is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah. So let's say data privacy laws fit into almost three different buckets, right? So one is laws that try to give people or try to support their own privacy rights. Then there's a bucket where governments like China, they have rights, right? And that supersede the individual's rights. And then we have laws that are data privacy laws that benefit businesses, right? So that's kind of the three buckets globally of privacy laws, and depending on where you are, you may get a different flavor of that. So GDPR is more about the individual. The data privacy laws in China, except for cyber, are more about the government's rights and how it supersedes in some ways the individual's rights. Again, except for cyber, because China is having China is forging laws related to cybersecurity and protection of individuals when they deal with customer data and things like identity theft. So they're very strong on that. Then you have laws in the US that are more about, it's consumer-based laws, but it's really, the laws are really for the businesses to say, this is how you have to treat someone's data, and this is what will happen to you if you don't treat someone's data a certain way. Most all privacy laws have kind of five fundamental areas. So one is about, how much rights does an individual have, how much protection is an individual afforded as it relates to privacy rights, how much data retention that a individual or a business can have, or how long a business can retain a person's data. So what we're seeing is laws that go into things like you can only keep someone's data for as long as the business purpose exists. So that's something that's very new in terms of data retention. And then also there are a lot of penalties for companies that have things like data breaches. So we're seeing that in laws. So the China laws like that about data breaches. And then the US has 50 different data breach notification laws. Probably one of the most influential is the New York Shield Act, which is to me very good because it has proactive features as well. So they're saying businesses to do business with people who are in New York need to have proactive steps to protect New York individuals' data. So again, it's just a patchwork of things around the world, and not all privacy regulations address all those things. Sometimes it's just more fragmented, but the GDPR addresses kind of all those issues. So it addresses kind of the security issue, the right of the individual, the idea that that businesses need to protect data of individuals, the idea about data retention, and then kind of agency, depending on where you are you may have more or less agency with your data when someone else, like a business or government, handles it. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Thank you very much.
I think this is a good opportunity to point out some of those principles that you'd put together, Debbie, because if you could, keep these in mind, it'll help you, even if you're not in the European Union, where the GDPR is most actively utilized, you can still help abide by those standards.
Right. So they're just kind of overarching principles that get articulated in different laws. So that's really the point behind it. Really, is to have a roadmap for businesses and how they handle data, and then also give people an idea of what their rights are from region to region.
Great, thank you. I've had another question from the audience. They say that you say that it's important to kind of keep hold of your data, of the data that you have. And is this actually possible for asylum seekers, given that they have to give quite a lot of information and data to the government to process the claim? And often governments aren't the best at keeping hold of data.
They're perhaps the worst, I would say, at keeping hold of data. So
yeah.
This is where the concept of secure data autonomy comes into place. And some of the, it's one of the key solutions that Pulse Connect is working to develop, is a platform and a solution that will allow people to have that verifiable displacement record. The concept of decentralization is sharing verifiable information across a network of people that all have a copy of previous records of, or an encrypted version of previous records of that chain of transactions. So if they can all, for you to upload something and confirm that it's been securely placed where you're placing it, if you were to use like decentralized ledger technology to do that, everyone else would have to agree and verify that you're the person that placed it there at that time. That doesn't mean that anyone has access to it. It's just that you can verifiably showcase that credential and securely store your information. And that's the power of decentralization that Randolph was referring to. So along the migratory pathway, if there is privacy enabling technology that allowed you to store your your photos or your documentation in a decentralized fashion, then you can, even if you may not lose the device that you're referencing it on, you can access it from another device and pull that out, pull that verifiable credential down to showcase you're an asylum seeker. And it becomes all the more important as this technology gets more and more adopted. The only learning curve is how can you enable people with cryptography if they're not familiar with some of the general concepts of it. So we're trying to build technology that's image driven, language agnostic, so that people can use it in any nation and from anywhere. And I think that's our suggested approach for tackling that issue.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, Daniel. It's kind of like the computer. If you go back to the 70s and 60s and look at those massive computers that took like how many rooms are like 10 or 15, 10 or 15 rooms or something like that. And you look now and you literally have a computer or smartphone in your hand, right? So the best way that I'd like to, I guess, describe, what blockchain or what decentralized technology is, typically, let's say you are an owner of a company and you have 100 employees, right? What's happening right now, or how usually companies store their information, is that they store their information in a database in one location in a server, right? And what decentralization means is that instead of the company storing that database of all the information your company does, right, every single employee in your company will have a copy of that database. So instead of storing it in one location, everyone will have a copy of that database. So at any point, anyone has anything different in that database, whether it be a different number or different transaction, something that changes so minuscule, then the technology itself will realize by itself that, hey, this person out of 99 people has an incorrect database, and we got to kick them out. And that's the way blockchain works.
Yeah, that's the benefit of the cryptography and the decentralized ledgers. And that's just so that you can say that, this document that I'm showing you is legitimate. So yeah, that's the explanation around that.
So instead of just relying on that one database that has all that information, right, if everyone in your business has a copy of that database, then it prevents cyber attacks or cyber crimes or identity theft before it happens. Because usually right now, the reason why we're seeing a lot of these issues, and I'm sure everyone's seen in the headlines, pipeline hack, Expedia data leak, and stuff like that, is because they have that architecture, right? So if you were to change that, then instead of now we have ways to prevent that from happening. If that makes sense.
And is there do you folks have a plan to push that out to governments worldwide as well, or is that a much bigger kind
We're
of question?
we have a suite of decentralized applications that are currently in I would say stealth mode, but are in development. And no, we're not aiming to push them to the governments necessarily, because they don't need to be the custodians in a decentralized environment. The aim is that we can enable people with privacy enabling technologies so that they can store that information in a decentralized manner, so they don't have to rely on an overarching third party for them to access their documentation, or for them to display a credential that was issued by a testable group. So whether you get a certification or whether you've gotten your passport stamped by an organization, we are working with certain federal agencies to verify driver in the United States, the driver's licenses, for example, so that we can go through and know your customer process, which is just important when providing cryptography and these kinds of attestations. But we very much aim to be regionally agnostic. And once those solutions are out and available, yes, we would like to make them available to everyone across the humanitarian sector and beyond.
That sounds fantastic. And it kind of feeds into another question that I had, which is, how can education about good data protection practices be disseminated more widely? By which I mean, how can we ensure that more people are educated about this, especially those along the migratory pathway, especially given that inevitably digital literacy varies enormously among any given population, and therefore along the migratory pathway there will be a lot of people with pretty much zero digital literacy, who will therefore presumably be very vulnerable to being scammed or to losing control of their data.
That's tricky. I mean, you're right. There is a literacy gap, and that is one of the biggest hurdles. I would say, making sure that the participants in the humanitarian sector, whether they be, governments, healthcare providers, or non-governmental organizations, go ahead and take that conscientious step in advance to train their volunteers before they come in HIPAA, in GDPR, not so that they can necessarily comply to it, but so that they can use the principles that both yourself are promoting, that we're promoting, to ensure the protection of those people that are being helped. Because you're right, they are extremely vulnerable. And Debbie, what's that?
Yeah, and Danny, that's like the $1 billion question right there. Because I myself, 3 weeks ago, or 3.5 weeks ago actually, I had a phishing attack in my email. And it was very presentable. I thought it came from one of our partners that, because we usually communicate through email. So it looked exactly like it came from him and so forth. And I opened it up, entered my password, and I realized, holy smokes, this is a phishing attack. So I told everyone within our company to change their passwords. Luckily, nothing happened. But it happened to me. And we're in this space too. So it's like even we have problems dealing with all this stuff. So I think Debbie might be the best person to answer this, but I think at the end of the day, we need to make data privacy, or just privacy and security, more fun. We need to sort of gamify it a little bit. We got to make it easy to understand, but at the same time, have this happy, or have this exciting factor into it. That's my answer.
Yeah, I guess I'll say two things. So there are, technology can't solve every problem, right? So there are some low tech things that people can do as well. So one thing that I recommend people do is to secure your identity documents. Don't have them laying around. Don't share that information with other people. Make sure it's in your possession at all times. That's kind of a very low tech thing that people can do. I wouldn't lay it like on a table or something and have someone look at it, or, especially when you're traveling, making sure, that stuff stays with you and you don't give it to people, right? Unless making sure that they're protecting it as well, like giving you back your, if you have your passport or your identity documents. Be very vigilant over how you maintain those documents. That's just the low tech way to do things. Also, I would say, phishing attacks are very successful. And really, phishing attacks are basically social engineering in a digital form. So someone is trying to get something from you that you would not have ordinarily shared with them. And typically, regardless of what they say and what the email says, it's typically an email that you did not ask for or a contact that you did not request, where someone is asking you to give them something. And it's typically something that they try to add a bit of urgency to. So it'll be an email that you didn't ask for, and it'll say something like, "Oh, you have to do this right away," or your bank account is going to close, or something like that. And so that's a typical phishing email. And so obviously, the first thing I would say is don't click on the link, Randolph. That would be the first thing. The second thing is the urgency is so that you can not really think through what they're asking. So if you're in doubt, don't do anything. So eventually the person will lose interest once they know that you're not going to just hurriedly do something. So it's important to just kind of stand back and don't do anything. They'll lose interest once they see that you're not going to take the bait.
Daniel, I just thought of another point there. For people that that work in regions where the literacy rate may be that low, if you have access to LinkedIn, Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva, happens to publish information almost daily that are key tips and suggestions. And I would highly recommend anyone tuning in to give her a follow and keep up with her. She very much drops gold almost on the daily and is not segmented to any one sector. It's applicable to the whole world.
She's a Data Diva.
Oh, thank you. Happy to help.
That sounds great. You heard it here, folks. That also makes me wonder if there's an issue around the division of expertise insofar as, and forgive me if I'm stereotyping or correct me if I'm totally wrong here, but most of the people I know who are experts in cybersecurity are working in that kind of field. And equally, most of the people I know who are teachers are not experts in data security. And you get in NGOs and in refugee camps and detention centers and things like that, you have language classes because you have language teachers, and you might have teachers trying to replicate as far as possible primary or secondary education in a refugee camp, and they might be teaching things like maths and even very basic IT, emails and things like that. But they're not going to be teaching blockchain. They're not going to be teaching data security because they won't know about that kind of thing. And I wonder if that's one of the problems here, is that there is a divide between you folks and the teachers or something.
Well, you're not wrong. Just the availability to the resources right off the bat. I mean, if the technology isn't readily available in the area, I know a lot of countries that often have high refugee populations don't let you import a lot of technologies, ironically. So yeah, I'd say there is a pretty big divide between the data privacy professionals and those educational opportunities. I think as people as resources are being disseminated across stressed nations and areas, it will definitely aid in people's familiarity with the concepts. And just like internet access has been tossed around as a human right, people will get more and more familiar with their digital presence, even if they may not have much of one now, because so many populations of the world are getting more and more educated every year. So hopefully there will be opportunities for I guess simplified data privacy modules to come out and help train both the teachers in those sectors as well as the actual individuals that they are teaching. That would be the ideal.
Yeah.
And that's really the mission of Pulse Connect. We want to develop technologies that's obviously bleeding edge and off-the-shelf technology, but at the same time, help individuals and businesses and non-for-profits and anyone that wants to be a part of this beautiful ecosystem, help them transcend into the digital age. Because let's face it, we're not going back, and we're not going back to Game Boys and Nintendos. I wish we did. I love that those days, to be honest with you. But that's really the mission of what we're doing. We want to make
Yeah.
these complex we want to take these complex terms and technologies and so forth, simplify down, and make it easy for people to understand, but also adapt and have them come from an environment or ecosystem that's not manipulative, that's not over controlling, and then there's no other exterior motives. So to say.
Yeah. And I would just say privacy should be as common as air, right? And privacy should transcends technology. It's a right of a human, right? So if we need to be able to communicate these concepts to someone who's 80 years old or someone who's 8 years old, and regardless of what country they're in and what they're doing, it's really about the right of an individual and the ability for them to be able to have agency over their data. So having these types of technologies being developed is sort of aiding in that, but those rights, those are cradle to grave rights for individuals, and privacy, again, is not just technology. Privacy existed before computers, right? So we're just trying to say, how can we articulate privacy in the digital age and leverage technology in a way to be able to protect it and help us.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Um, if I may, then I'll ask another question, since you're doing such a great job so far with the questions I've been asking.
Go ahead, bring them on.
Great. So in terms of kind of data retention along the migratory pathway,
Yeah.
does this create other issues in terms of moving between different countries with their own privacy laws and their own practices? Is there an issue with data maybe being more widely disseminated between countries, especially given the linguistic barriers that you mentioned earlier in your presentation?
Yeah, that is like I said, a very large hurdle. So aside from the data portability issue of just like having the technology to move between regions, there is a lot of the concept of a walled garden where information is siloed to a specific region or system, and obviously countries will have their different rules and regulation and try to keep that information within the walled garden. I won't name any countries in particular, but there are some that have very, very high, concentrations of refugees that don't allow health data to leave the country, which makes it really difficult when you spend, half a year in a refugee camp and can't take the information that is yours at the end of the day with you when you leave. It is a large problem, and decentralization is the solution.
Yeah, and Danny, that goes for the health world too. I mean, if we take a look here in the United States, there's so many electronic vendors that each state has their own jurisdictions, each state has their own systems, and it's like, okay, how do we combine all this? So it goes from industry to industry, from the non-for-profit to the for-profit side. So it's a massive problem, right? But I think as the time goes, and maybe 1 to 5 years from now, I think the whole globe is going to be working on a set of standards, whether it be for privacy or security, or for data portability or whatever it might be. It's going to come to that level. So,
well, the positive side and the very bright side is that just recently, earlier this year, the United States passed legislation that made it so that those electronic health record systems have to make your data available to you. I'm sure it's in a goal to align with the GDPR, but the GDPR explicitly says, the right to access, delete, update, and access your information. So the health record systems here in the United States have, they have to allow individuals or organizations to access their health records externally via an API, which is called an application programming interface, which is just a tricky name for saying building a connection. So yeah, there are steps being taken, but right now it is very tricky and country by country.
That makes sense. Yeah. Do you know if there are any internationally agreed upon ethical guidelines around data management and privacy?
There are a few. Let me think.
Did you want me to answer
Yeah,
that?
please.
Yeah. So sorry, I have to jump in about a minute. But that's a great question. So internationally, there aren't any ethical guidelines currently. And that's kind of troubling. And I think a lot of people want to see some agreement on an international level about what we think is right or wrong, right? So maybe some kind of basic principles, but we're not seeing any kind of global steps towards that. What we are seeing is a region by region, you know, thing where people are making laws, but laws, not all laws are ethical, right? So I think the challenge is to be able to find ways where we can define things in an ethical way on a global level, but I think it's hard to get that type of consensus around the world, but I would love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be nice. I wish there were standards. There are some initiatives, but I don't think there's anything that's been passed as far as ethical legislation to enforce it.
Fair enough. Yeah, it struck me as maybe asking a bit too much, given how difficult it is for the world's governments to agree on anything. And indeed, given how digitally illiterate so many lawmakers can be.
Yes.
You know what? Actually, I think there is one thing I would reference as a resource. The ICRC has published rules, I guess this past year in 2020, on personal data protection, and they are, I guess, leaders in the humanitarian sector. They're at most refugee facilities. So I'd highly recommend sourcing that. And if anyone's interested, I don't know if I can drop the link, but I will find that, and you can reach out via email at mterrell@pulseconnect.net, and feel free to share it with you.
Yeah. Please, so everyone listening and everyone who will be listening and seeing the recording, go to our website, pulseconnect.net. You'll find exactly who we are, what solutions we're offering and building towards, and pretty much the mission of what we're doing. So please go again. Randolph Rodriguez here. My emails are Rodriguez with a Z at pulseconnect.net. So if you want to reach out to myself or Michael, you may do so.
Thank you. And Debbie's had to leave. Do you both have time for one more question quickly?
Of course.
Brilliant. Thank you. Where was it? See, now I'm not going to be able to find this last question. Oh yeah. So there's a lot of problems with migrants and asylum seekers needing a lot of documents to prove their identity and the validity of their asylum claim, and to back up their case. And do you know of any new technologies or actors in the sector that might be able to help with this?
Yeah, that's a great thought. I would say there are actually some different solutions. Again, the concept for the kind of digital verifiable credentials, just like that, that paperwork that says that they are refugees. That can be the person that issues it is an issuer. Person receiving it is the holder, and then you can have other parties to verify that information, and that's called the trust triangle. And if you're able to establish a system that uses communication between systems to verify that information, you can digitize that. And so all of our solutions are embedding verifiable credentials into our program, so that you can have an issuer upload that credential, or an attestation saying this person maintained refugee status or achieved refugee status on this date. That way they can store it digitally and verify, or it's called a verifiable presentation. They can verifiably promote it via a QR code that can be scanned by anyone with a smart device to say where it'll take them to that attestation and show this person was issued this on this date and it's verified by this person. And so that's the power of decentralized ledgers. And we're very much not the only ones in the space, but that has been identified as the clear route for all types of verifiable attestations, specifically the COVID-19 ones, but it's just as applicable to passports or refugee status documentation. I know that there is a lot, and the pushback has been pretty incredible these last few years, but that is the clear route.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. It looks like that's the last of our questions from the audience as well. Do either of you have any concluding remarks before I just quickly tell everyone about our next webinar?
Nothing besides just, if you're in the humanitarian sector, take a step back. I know that it seems like, a ton of high level material, but it's really not. Debbie said it great. Privacy has been around since long before computers. And when you are someone that, yes, you may be volunteering or you may be offering a health service, but you're helping people in need that truly can't necessarily protect themselves in all circumstances. So think about it when you go to yell over someone's personal identifiable information, as opposed to walking it across the room to somebody, because that could mean the difference of them, having their privacy corroded or, put at risk. So we just want to, encourage everyone to use those principles that we suggested earlier so that you can help protect the people you're helping.
Yeah, I think the biggest maybe advice or tip that I've learned throughout the past couple of months is read, and do more reading. So just simply because we're at such a digital stage in our lives for everyone, we need to understand these technologies. We need to understand how our data is being managed, who's managing our data, who we're chat messaging online, and all that kind of stuff. We just need to make sure that we're informed, we're educated, but more importantly, we think. We need to start having more of an open mind and understand that, hey, and even myself, I'll be frank with you, I'm not a coder by any means, right? But we learned about these technologies, and all it took was just reading literature and reading projects and so forth. So that'll be my biggest takeaways: read more and just have an open mind.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Well, for everyone watching, that has been our webinar on data protection along the migratory pathway. We have, as is our tradition, we generally have 2 webinars along broadly similar themes each month, and later in June, on June the 29th at 4 p.m. UTC, we will be having a webinar on technology in the humanitarian space, looking at how the growing digitalization of, well, essentially everything impacts migrants and also the humanitarian sector. So do keep an eye on our social media if you'd like to register for that. We have lawyers, academics, and representatives of different NGOs that are working on kind of technology in the humanitarian sector joining us for that. So it should be a really interesting discussion. So keep an eye on our social media for that. We'll also be posting this to YouTube shortly if you would like to share it with anyone. And all that remains is to say a huge thank you to Michael and Randolph and to Debbie, who's had to leave. It's been really interesting, both the presentation and the discussion afterwards. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for the invite. And again, we love the work that Insight Collaborative does. And if you guys are in tune with them, please recommend someone to follow. Or they publish stories all the time. Just share. You don't have to just share it digitally. You can actually tell someone about it. So I highly encourage you to do so.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. It was a pleasure.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys. Hope to work with you again soon.
Oh, absolutely. Take care and have a good evening and a great weekend.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.